Tartt. We're in the last parts of chapter 2.
Plantation of bananas. He got the black man in the field. He just watched them sweat all day. Now he's sitting his big cool house. And all the people say he's a banana king. Drinking rum and a cola. They call him Banana King. He's on the
Victrola.
At night he calls out for British Slugger. Come out on the veranda. The lights go down, but not in his sight. And he gives her a piece of banana. There is no warning for Banana Man. The gun still smokes in her sweaty hand. With just one bullet, she won her freedom. And put an end to Banana Man. He's a banana king. Drinking rum and a cola. They call him Banana King. Music plays on the shoulder. He's a banana king. Drinking rum and a cola. They call him Banana King. Music plays on the shoulder.
All right, bruvs, we're back with the end of chapter 2 of Donna Tartt's The Little Friend. A little friend, bruv. Let's see if I can get through this without coughing my lungs. Page 1 or 225. Let's get a little light on there. There we go. We got some light on there, bruv. 225. Wait for my screen to appear. There we are. There we are. 225. All right, Bobs. When there was no answer to her knock, Harriet nudged Tatt's bedroom door open. In the dimness, she saw her old aunt dozing on the white summer bedspread with her glasses off and her mouth open. Tat, she said uncertainly. The room smelled of medicine, brandy, water, vetiver, and mentholatum, and dust. A fan purred in sleepy half circles. Hello, Brobs, what's up? Stirring the filmy curtains to the left and then the right. Tat slept on. The room was cool and still. Silver-framed photographs on the bureau. Judge Cleve and Harriet's grandmother, that is, cameo at her throat before the turn of the century. Harriet's mother as a 1950s debutante with elbow gloves and a fussy hairdo. A hand-tinted 8x10 of Tat's husband, Mr. Pink, as a young man, and a glossy newspaper shot much later of Mr. Pink accepting an award from the Chamber of Commerce. On the heavy dressing table stood Tat's things, Pond's cold cream, a jelly jar of hairpins, pincushion and bake-like comb and brush set, and a single lipstick, a plain, modest little family, neatly arranged as if for a group picture. Harriet felt as if she might cry. She flung herself on the bed. Tat woke with a jolt. Gracious, Harriet. Gracious. Harriet! All right. The emphasis is all wrong, but there you go. Blindly, she struggled up and fumbled for her glasses. What's wrong? Where's your little company? He went home. Teddy, do you love me? What's the matter? What time is it, honey? She cried. She said, squinting uselessly at the bedside clock. You're not crying, are you? She leaned over to feel Harriet's forehead with her palm, but it was damp and cool. What on earth's the matter? Can I spend the night? Tat's heart sank. Oh, darling, poor Taddy's half dead with allergies. Please tell me what's wrong, honey. Are you feeling bad? I won't be any trouble. Darling, oh, darling, you are never any trouble for me, and Allison isn't either, but why don't you or Libby or Adeline ever want me to stay over? Tat was flummoxed. Now, Harriet, she said. She reached over and switched on her reading lamp. You know that's not true. You never asked me. Well, look, Harriet, I'll get the calendar. Let's pick a date next week. And by then I'll be feeling better. And she trailed away. The child was crying. Look here, she said in a sprightly voice. Though Tat tried to act interested when her female... God damn, I can't read. Tried to act interested when her friends rhapsodized about their grandchildren. She wasn't sorry that she didn't have any of her own. Children bored and irritated her, a fact she struggled valiantly to conceal from her little nieces. Let me run, get a washcloth. You'll feel better if... No, you come with me. Harriet, stand up. She took Harriet's grubby hand and led her down the dark hall to the bathroom. She turned on both faucets in the sink and handed her a bar of pink toilet soap. Here, sweetheart, wash your face and hands. Hands first. Now then, splash a little of that cool water on your face. That'll make you feel better. She moistened the washcloth and busily dabbed Harriet's cheeks with it, then handed it to her. There, darling. Now will you take this nice cool rag and wash around your neck and under your arms for me? Harriet did, mechanically, a single pass over her throat, and then reaching the cloth up under her shirt for a couple of feeble swipes. Now, I know you can do better than that. Doesn't Ida make you wash? Yes, ma'am, said Harriet, rather hopelessly. How come you're so dirty then? Does she make you get in the bathtub every day? Yes, ma'am. Does she make you stick your head under the faucet and check to see if the soap is wet after you get out? It doesn't do a bit of good, Harriet, if you climb into a tub of hot water and just sit there. Ida Rue knows good and well that she needs to. It's not Ida's fault. Why does everyone blame everything on Ida? Nobody's blaming her. I know you love Ida, sweetheart, but I think your grandmother may need to have a little talk with her. Ida hasn't done anything wrong. It's just that colored people have different ideas. Oh, Harriet, please, said Taddy, wringing her hands. No, please don't start with that again. Eugene, rather anxiously, followed Loyal outside after dinner. Loyal looked at peace with the world, ready for a leisurely after-dinner stroll. But Eugene, who had changed into his uncomfortable black preaching suit after dinner, was clammy all over with anxiety. He glanced at himself in the side mirror of Loyal's truck and ran a quick comb through his greasy gray ducktail. What the hell was that? The previous night's revival off on a farm somewhere on the opposite side of the country had not been a success. The curiosity seekers who'd shown up at the brushwood arbor had snickered and thrown bottle tops and bits of gravel and ignored the collection plate and got up and jostled away before the service was over. And who could blame them? Young Reese, with his eyes like blue gas flames and his hair blown backwards, as if he'd just seen an angel, might have more faith in his little finger than the lot of these sniggerers combined. But not one snake had come out of the box, not one. And though Eugene was embarrassed by this, neither was he eager to bring them out with his own hands. Loyal had assured him of a warmer reception tonight at Boiling Spring, but what did Eugene care about Boiling Spring? Sure, there was a regular congregation of the faithful over there, and it belonged to somebody else. Day after tomorrow, they were going to try drumming up a crowd on the square. Yet how in the world could they, when their biggest crowd draw, the snakes, was prohibited by law? Loyal seemed not at all bothered by any of this. I'm here to do God's work, he said, and God's work is to battle death. The previous night, he'd been untroubled by the jeers of the crowd, but though Eugene feared the snakes and knew himself incapable of taking them up in his own hands, neither was he looking forward to another such night of public humiliation. They were standing out on the lighted concrete slab they all called the carport, with a gas grill at one end and a basketball goal at the other. Eugene glanced nervously at Loyal's truck, at the trap which draped the caged snakes piled in back, at the bumper sticker which read in slanted, fanatical letters, "This world is not my home." Curtis was safely inside, watching television. If he saw them leaving, he would cry to come along, and Eugene was about to suggest that they just get in the truck and go when the screen door creaked open and out shuffled Gum in their direction. "Hello there, ma'am," called Loyal cordially. Eugene turned partially away. These days he was having to fight a constant hatred of his grandmother, and he had to keep reminding himself that Gum was only an old lady. Sick, too sick for years. He remembered the day long ago when he and Farish were little, his father stumbling home drunk in the middle of the afternoon and yanking them out of the trailer into the yard as if for a whipping. His face was bright red and he spoke through clenched teeth, but he wasn't angry. He was crying, "Oh, Lord, I've been sick this morning ever since I heard. Lord God, have mercy. Lord Gum won't be with us more than a month or two. The doctors say she's eat to the bone with cancer." That was 2 decades ago. 4 brothers had been born since then and grown up and left home, or been disabled, or sent to prison. Father and uncle and mother, as well as the stillborn baby sister, were all in the ground. Yet Gum thrived. Her death sentences from various doctors and health department officials had arrived quite regularly all throughout Eugene's childhood and adolescence, and Gum continued to receive them every 6 months or so. She delivered the bad news herself now, apologetically, now that their father was dead. Her spleen was enlarged and about to rupture. Her liver or her pancreas or her thyroid had given out. She was eaten up with this kind of cancer or that kind of cancer, so many different kinds that her bones were blackened to charcoal from it, like chicken bones charred in the wood stove. And indeed, Gum did look eaten up. Unable to kill her, the cancer had taken up residence within her and made her its comfortable home, nesting in her rib cage, rooted firmly and pushing its tentacle tips up through the surface of her skin in a spatter of black moles. So it seemed to Eugene, if someone was to cut Gum open at this point, there was apt to be no blood in her at all, only a mass of poisonous sponge. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking," Eugene's visitor said politely, "Hi come your boys, come to call you Gum." "Ain't none of us know why. The name just stuck," chortled Farish, bursting from his taxidermy shed, accompanied by a beam of electric light on the sawgrass. He charged up behind her and put his arms around her and tickled her like they were sweethearts. "Aunt me to chunk you in the back of that truck with them snakes, Gum?" "Quit," said Gum listlessly. She felt it undignified to show how much she liked this sort of rough attention, but she did like it all the same, and though her expression was blank, her tiny black eyes were bright with pleasure. Eugene's visitor peered suspiciously inside the open door of the taxidermy methamphetamine shack, which was windowless, bathed in the bald light of a ceiling bulb. Beakers, copper pipe, an incredibly complex and jury-rigged network of vacuum pumps and tubing and burners and old bathroom faucets, gruesome reminders of the taxidermy work, like an embryo cougar preserved in formaldehyde, and a clear plastic fishing tackle box full of different kinds of glass eyes gave the setup a feel of Frankenstein's laboratory. Come on in," said Farish, wheeling around. He let go of Gum and grabbed up Loyal by the back of his shirt and half threw him through the laboratory door. Eugene followed anxiously. His visitor, perhaps accustomed to similar rough behavior from his brother Dolphus, did not seem nervous, but Eugene had seen enough of Farish to know that Farish's good humor was plenty to be nervous about. "Farish," he said stridently. "Farsh." "Farsh," he said. Inside, the dark shelves were lined with glass jars of chemicals. the rows of whiskey bottles with the label scraped off, filled with some dark liquid that Farish used in his laboratory work. Danny, wearing a pair of rubber dishwashing gloves, Jesus Christ, dishwashing gloves, was seated up upon an upended plastic bucket, picking at something or other with a small utensil. A glass filtering flask bubbled behind him. A stuffed chicken hawk, wings outspread, glowered from the shadowy rafters as if to sweep down and strike. On the shelves were also largemouth bass mounted on crude wooden displays, turkey feet, fox heads, house cats, from grown toms down to tiny kittens, woodpeckers, snake birds, and an egret, half-stitched and stinking. Tell you what, Loyal, I had somebody bring me in a bull moccasin this big wish I still had him to show to you, because I do believe he was bigger than any you've got in the truck there. Chewing his thumbnail, Eugene edged inside and looked over Loyal's shoulder, perceiving as if for the first time through Loyal's eyes the stuffed kittens, the droop-necked egret with eye sockets wrinkled like cowrie shells. For his taxidermy, he said aloud when he felt Loyal's gaze lingering upon the rows of whiskey bottles, "The Lord means for us to love his kingdom and guard it and shepherd it beneath us," said Loyal, gazing up at the grim walls which, between stink and carcass and shadow, were like a cross-section of hell itself. "You'll forgive me if I don't know whether that means it's right for us to mount 'em and stuff 'em." In the corner, Eugene spotted the pile of Hustler magazines. The picture on the top one was sickening. He laid an arm on Loyal's arm. "Come on, let's go," he said, for he didn't know what Loyal might say or do if he saw the picture. An unpredictable behavior of any sort was unwise around Farish. "Well," said Farish, "I don't know, but what, you're right. I don't know, but what, you're right, Loyal." To Eugene's horror, Farish leaned over his aluminum work table and, tossing his hair over his shoulder, sniffed up a white streak of something Eugene presumed to be dope. Through a rolled-up dollar bill. "Excuse me here, but am I wrong in supposing, Loyal, that you'd eat a nice fat T-bone steak as fast as my brother here?" "What is that?" inquired Loyal. "Headache powder. Farish hair is disabled," Danny chimed in helpfully. "My goodness," Loyal said mildly to Gum, who at her snail's creep had only now just managed to shuffle from truck bed to doorway. "Affliction is certainly a fierce teacher amongst your children." Ferris tossed his hair back and straightened from the table with a loud sniff. No matter that he was the only person in the household who collected disability checks, he did not care for his own misfortune to be mentioned in the same breath with Eugene's facial disfigurement, and certainly not with Curtis's more extensive problems. "Ain't that the truth, Loyal?" said Gum, wagging her head mournfully. "The good Lord has give me a terrible time with the cancer and the arthritis and the sugar diabetes, and this year," she indicated the cane-looking black and purple scab on her neck the size of a quarter. "That's where poor old Gum had to have her veins scraped," she said solicitously, craning her neck to one side so Loyal could have a better view. "That's where they come right in with that catheter. Right in through there, you see." "What time tonight y'all fixing to revive these folks?" said Danny brightly, finger to nostril after straightening up from his own dose of headache powder. "We are to leave," said Eugene to Loyal. "Come on." And then Gum was saying to Loyal, "Then they insertioned this, what you call balloon, in my neck veins here, and they, Gum, he's got to go." Gum cackled and caught the sleeve of Loyal's long-sleeved white dress shirt with a black speckled claw. She was delighted to have discovered such a considerate listener and was reluctant to let him get away so easily. Harriet walked home from Tattie's. The wide sidewalks were shaded by pecan and magnolia trees, littered with crushed petals from the crepe myrtles. Faintly across the warm air floated the sad evening chimes from the First Baptist Church. The houses on Main Street were grander than the Georgians and Carpenter Gothic cottages of George Street. Greek Revival, I'm not sure how you say that word. Second Empire Victorian, relics of a cotton economy gone bust. A few, but not many, were still owned by descendants of the families who had built them. A couple had even been bought by rich people from out of town. But there was also a growing number of eyesores with tricycles in the yard and clotheslines strung between the Doric columns. The light was falling, whatever. The light was failing. A firefly blinked down at the end of the street, and practically by her nose, two more flashed in quick sequence. Pop, pop. She wasn't quite ready to go home, not yet. And though Main Street got desolate and a bit frightening this far down, she told herself that she would walk a little further down to the Alexandria Hotel. Everyone still called it the Alexandria Hotel, though no hotel had existed there in Harriet's lifetime, or indeed even Edie's. During the yellow fever epidemic of '79, when the stricken town was deluged by ill and panicked strangers fleeing from Natchez and New Orleans, the dying had been packed like sardines on the porch and the balcony of the overflowing hotel, screaming, raving, crying out for water, while the dead lay heaped on the sidewalk out front. About every 5 years, someone tried to open up the Alexandria Hotel again and use it for a dry goods shop or a meeting hall or something or other, but such efforts never lasted long. Simply walking past the place made people uncomfortable. A few years ago, some people from out of town had tried to open a tea room in the lobby, but now it was closed. Harriet stopped on the sidewalk. Down at the end of the empty street loomed the hotel, a white, staring-eyed wreck, indistinct in the twilight. Then, all of a sudden, she thought she saw something move in an upstairs window, something fluttery, like a piece of cloth, and she turned and fled, heart pounding, down the long, darkening street, as if a flotilla of ghosts were skimming after her. She ran all the way home without stopping and clattered in at the front door, breathless, exhausted, spots jumping in front of her eyes. Allison was downstairs, sitting in front of the television. "Mother is worried," she said. "Go tell her you're home." "Oh," and Healy called. Harriet was halfway up the stairs when her mother flew down at her with a great flap, flap, flap of bedroom slippers. "Where have you been? Answer me this minute." Her face was flushed and shiny. She had thrown on a wrinkled, old, white dress shirt that belonged to Harriet's father over her nightgown. She grabbed Harriet's shoulder and shook her, and then, incredibly, shoved her against the wall so that Harriet's head knocked against the framed engraving of the singer, Jenny Lind. Harriet was mystified. "What's the matter?" she said, blinking. "Do you know how worried I've been?" Her mother's voice was high and peculiar. "I've been sick, wondering where you are. Out of my mind. Mother." In confusion, Harriet sneered an arm over her face. Was she drunk? Sometimes her father behaved like this when he was home for Thanksgiving and had too much to drink. "I thought you were dead. How dare you?" "What's wrong?" The overhead lights were harsh, and all Harriet could think of was getting upstairs to her bedroom. "I was only at Tatt's." "Nonsense. Tell me the truth." "And the train's answering?" "I was," said Harriet impatiently, attempting again to sidestep her mother. "Call her if you don't believe me." "I certainly will, first thing in the morning." "Right now, you tell me where you've been." "Go on," said Harriet, exasperated at having her path blocked. "Call her." Harriet's mother took a quick, angry step towards her, and Harriet, just as quickly, moved 2 steps down. Her frustrated gaze landed on the pastel portrait of her mother, spark-eyed, humorous, with a camel hair coat and a glossy, teen queen ponytail which had been drawn on the street in Paris during junior year abroad. Go on, Chooch. Let it out, buddy. The portrait's eyes, starry with their exaggerated highlights of white chalk, seemed to widen with lively sympathy at Harriet's dilemma. "Why do you want to torture me like this?" Harriet turned from the chalk portrait to stare back into the same face, much older in a vaguely unnatural-looking way, which suggested that it had been reconstructed after some terrible accident. "Why?" screamed her mother. "Do you want to drive me crazy?" A tingle of alarm prickled at Harriet's scalp. Every so often, Harriet's mother behaved oddly or got confused and upset, but not like this. It was only 7 o'clock. In the summer, Harriet often stayed out playing past 10, and her mother didn't even notice. Allison was standing at the foot of the stairs with one hand on the tulip-shaped knob of the newel post. Allison, Harriet asked rather gruffly, what's the matter with Mama? Harriet's mother slapped her. Though it didn't hurt much, it made a lot of noise. Harriet put a hand to her cheek and stared at her mother, who was breathing fast in odd little huffs. Mama, what did I do? She was too shocked to cry. If you were worried, why didn't you call Healy? I can't be calling over at the halls and rousing the whole house at this hour of the morning. Allison at the foot of the stairs looked as stunned as Harriet felt. For some reason, Harriet suspected that she was at the bottom of the misunderstanding, whatever it was. You did something, she roared. What did you tell her? But Allison's eyes, round and credulous, were fastened on their mother. Mama, she said, what do you mean, morning? Charlotte, a hand on the banister, looked stricken. It's night, Tuesday night, said Allison. Charlotte was dead still for a moment, eyes wide, and her mouth slightly parted. Then she ran down the stairs, her heelless slippers slapping loudly, and looked out the window by the front door. Oh, my word, she said, leaning forward, both hands on the sill. She unsnapped the deadbolt. She stepped out into the front porch in the twilight. Very slowly, like she was dreaming, she walked to a rocking chair and sat down. Heavens, she said, you're right. I woke up and the clock said 6:30, and so help me, I thought it was 6 in the morning. For a while, there was no sound at all except the crickets and the voices from up the street. The Godfreys had company. An unfamiliar white car stood in the driveway, and a station wagon was pulled along the curb in front. Wisps of smoke from the barbecue grill rose in the yellowy light on their back porch. Charlotte looked up at Harriet. Her face was sweaty, too white, and the pupils of her eyes so huge and black and swallowing that the irises were shrunk to nothing, blue coronas glowing at the edges of eclipsed moons. Harriet, I thought you'd been gone all night. She was clammy and gasping, as if half drowned. Oh, baby, I thought you were kidnapped or dead. Mama had a bad dream, and oh, dear God, I hit you. She put her hands over her face and started to cry. Come inside, Mama, said Allison quietly, please. It wouldn't do for the Godfreys or Mrs. Fountain to see their mother crying on the front porch in her nightgown. Harriet, come here. How can you ever forgive me? Mama's crazy, she sobbed wetly into Harriet's hair. I'm so sorry. Squashed against her mother's chest at an uncomfortable angle, tried not to squirm. She felt suffocated. Up above, as if from a distance, her mother wept and coughed with muffled hacking sounds. Like a shipwreck victim washed up on a beach, the pink fabric of the nightgown pressed against Harriet's cheek was so magnified that it didn't even look like cloth, but a technical crosshatch of coarse, ropey skeins. It was interesting. Harriet shut the eye against her mother's breast. The pink vanished. Both eyes opened. Back it popped. She experimented with alternate winks, watching the optical illusion leap back and forth until a fat tear, inordinately huge, dropped onto the cloth and spread in a crimson stain. Suddenly her mother caught her by the shoulders. Her face was shiny and smelled of cold cream. Her eyes were inky black and alien, like the eyes of a nurse shark that Harriet had seen in an aquarium on the Gulf Coast. You don't know what it's like, she said. Once more, Harriet found herself crushed to the front of her mother's nightgown. Concentrate, she told herself. If she thought hard enough, she could be somewhere else. A parallelogram of light slanted onto the front porch. The front door stood ajar. Mama, she heard Allison say very faintly, please. When at last Harriet's mother allowed herself to be taken by the hand and coaxed inside, Allison led her carefully to the couch, settled her down with a cushion behind her head, and turned on the television. Its chatter a frank relief, the bouncy music, the unconcerned voices. She then trailed in and out, bringing Kleenex, headache powders, cigarettes, and an ashtray. A glass of iced tea and an ice pack their mother kept in the freezer. clear plastic, swimming pool blue shaped like a harlequin half mask from Mardi Gras, which she wore over her eyes when her sinuses were bothering her or when she suffered what she called sick headaches. Their mother accepted the Kleenex and the tea from the little heap of comforts, and murmuring distractedly by the while, pressed the aquamarine ice pack to her forehead. What must you think of me? I'm so ashamed of myself. The ice mask did not escape Harriet, who sat studying her mother from the armchair opposite. She had several times seen her father, the morning after he'd been drinking, sitting stiffly at his desk with the blue ice mask tied onto his head, and he made phone calls or flipped angrily through his papers. But there was no liquor on her mother's breath. Pressed to her mother's chest out on the porch, she hadn't smelled a thing. In fact, her mother didn't drink, not the way that Harriet's father did. Every now and then she mixed herself a bourbon and Coke, but usually she carried it around all evening until the ice melted and the paper napkin got soggy and fell asleep before she managed to drink the whole thing. Allison reappeared in the doorway. She glanced over at their mother quickly to make sure she wasn't looking, and then silently mouthed the words to Harriet. It's her birthday. It's his birthday. Harriet blinked, of course. How could she have forgotten? Usually it was the anniversary of his death. In May, that set their mother off, crying fits, inexplicable panics. A few years ago, it had been so bad that she had been unable to leave the house to attend Allison's 8th grade graduation. But this May, the date had come and gone without incident. Allison cleared her throat. Mama, I'm running you a bath, she said. Her voice was strangely crisp and adult. You don't have to get in if you don't want to. Harriet stood to go upstairs, but her mother flung out an arm and a panicky, lightning-quick gesture, as if she were about to walk in front of a car. Girls, my two sweet girls. She patted the sofa on either side, and though her face was swollen from crying, in her voice was a will-o'-the-wisp, faint but bright, of the sorority girl in the hall portrait. Harriet, why in the world didn't you speak up, she said. Did you have a good time with Taddy? What did you talk about? Once again, Harriet found herself struck dumb in the unwelcome glare of her mother's attention. For some reason, all she could think of was a carnival ride she had been on when she was small, with a ghost sailing placidly back and forth along a length of fishing line in the dark, and how unexpectedly the ghost had jumped its track and shot right in her face. Every now and then she still woke bolt upright from a sound sleep when the white shape flew at her out of the dark. What did you do at Taddy's house? Played chess. In the silence that followed, Harriet tried to think of some funny or entertaining observation to tack on to this reply. Her mother put an arm around Allison to make her feel included too. And why didn't you go, honey? Have you had your supper yet? And now we present the ABC Movie of the Week, said the television. Me, Natalie, starring Patty Duke, James Ferrantino, and Martin Balsam. During the opening credits of the movie, Harriet stood and started up to her room, only to have her mother follow her up the stairs. Do you hate Mother for acting so crazy, she asked, standing forlornly in the open door room. Why don't you come watch the movie with us? Just the three of us. No, thank you, said Harriet politely. Her mother was staring down at the rug, alarmingly close. Harriet realized to the tar-stained spot. Part of the stain was visible near the edge of the bed. A string in her mother's throat seemed to pop helplessly. Her glance darted over Allison's stuffed animals, the pile of books on the window seat by Harriet's bed. You must hate me, she said in a rusty voice. Harriet looked at the floor. She couldn't stand it when her mother was melodramatic like this. No, Mama, she said, I just don't want to watch that movie. Oh, Harriet, I had the worst dream, and it was so terrible. When I woke up and you weren't here. You know that Mother loves you, don't you, Harriet? Harriet had a hard time answering. She felt slightly numbed, as if she were underwater. The long shadows, the eerie greenish lamplight, the breeze washing in the curtains. Don't you know I love you? Yes, said Harriet, but her voice sounded thin, like it came from a long way off. or belonged to somebody else. And that's all for chapter 3. Chapter 4 awaits. Goodbye, bruv. Guten Abend, Herr Morgan.